What would you do if the man who abandoned you while pregnant showed up at your door 18 years later, begging for forgiveness? Would you slam it in his face? Or would you let him meet the son he never knew existed? That's exactly the choice one young woman faced. But when she finally opened that door, the man who had left her homeless and desperate at 17 wasn't alone. And what she discovered about the night he disappeared would shatter everything she believed for nearly 2 decades. The truth behind why he abandoned her will leave you absolutely speechless. And the moment when their son walks into the room, well, that's when everything changes. Before we dive into this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. The morning started like any other for Elena Martinez. At 35, she had built a modest but stable life in the small coastal town of Sea Haven, Maine. She owned a small bakery on Harbor Street, had a cozy apartment above the shop, and most importantly, had raised an incredible son, despite every odds stacked against her. But this particular morning, as she arranged fresh pastries in the display case, she had no idea that her carefully constructed world was about to be turned upside down. The bell above the door chimed, and Elena looked up with her usual welcoming smile. That smile froze on her face. Standing in her doorway, after 18 years of silence, was Chen, the man who had promised her the world, who had sworn he loved her, who had vanished without a word when she was 17 years old. And 3 months pregnant, he looked older, of course. The boyish charm that had once made her heart skip had been replaced by worry lines and grey threading through his still thick black hair. But those eyes, those dark eyes that her son had inherited, were unmistakable. "Elena," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Please, I know I have no right to be here, but I need to talk to you." Behind him stood a woman in an expensive suit, her expression unreadable behind designer sunglasses. Everything about Marcus screamed wealth now. From his tailored clothes to his Italian leather shoes, such a contrast to the struggling college student who had once worked 2 jobs just to take her to dinner. "You need to leave," Elena managed, her hands gripping the counter. "Now." 5 minutes, Marcus pleaded. "That's all I'm asking. 5 minutes. To explain why I left. You deserve to know the truth." Elena wanted to laugh, or cry, or throw something at him. 5 minutes to explain 18 years of absence. 18 years of wondering what she had done wrong. 18 years of answering her son's questions about why his father didn't want them. The memories flooded back uninvited, as sharp and painful as the day they were formed. Elena had been 17, a senior at Millbrook High School with dreams of becoming a teacher. She was smart, driven, and had just received early acceptance to 3 different colleges. Then Chen had transferred to their school, and everything changed. He was unlike anyone she'd ever met, brilliant, funny, and kind in a way that seemed genuine. His family had moved from California, his father some kind of tech entrepreneur who wanted a simpler life for his family. Marcus tutored her in calculus, and somewhere between derivatives and integrals, they fell in love, or at least she thought they had. When Elena discovered she was pregnant, she was terrified, but not devastated. Marcus had been talking about their future together, about marriage after graduation, about building a life. She believed him when he held her and promised everything would be okay. They would tell their parents together, figure out a plan. He even went with her to her first prenatal appointment, holding her hand as they heard the baby's heartbeat for the 1st time. Then, 3 days later, he was gone. No goodbye, no explanation. His family's house stood empty, a for sale sign planted in the yard. His phone number was disconnected. Even his social media accounts had vanished. It was as if Marcus Chen had been erased from existence. Elena's parents, traditional and religious, gave her an ultimatum: give up the baby for adoption or leave their house. At 17, homeless and pregnant, she made the only choice her heart would allow. She kept her baby and lost everything else. Those first months were the darkest of her life. She slept in her car until a kind-hearted woman named Rosa, who ran a shelter for young mothers, took her in. Elena finished high school through sheer determination, graduating with honors despite morning sickness and exhaustion. She worked every job available, cleaning offices at night, stocking shelves, washing dishes, saving every penny for her child. When Christopher was born, Elena looked into his perfect face and saw Marcus's eyes staring back at her. It broke her heart and filled it simultaneously. She promised her son he would never feel unwanted, never question his worth, never doubt he was loved. 18 years of keeping that promise. 18 years of birthday parties without a father, of school events with an empty chair, of Mother's Day cards that said, "Thanks for being my mom and dad." 18 years of Christopher asking fewer and fewer questions about his father as he grew old enough to understand that some questions hurt too much to answer. And now Marcus stood in her bakery, asking for 5 minutes, as if time could be parceled out in neat little segments that could somehow make up for 6,570 days of absence. "I know you hate me," Marcus continued, still standing in the doorway, "and you have every right to. But Elena, I didn't leave because I wanted to. I left because I had to, because they made me." "They?" Elena's voice was ice. "Who's they? Who made you abandon your pregnant girlfriend?" The woman behind Marcus stepped forward, removing her sunglasses to reveal sharp, calculating eyes. "Ms. Martinez, my name is Vivian Zhao. I'm an attorney representing the Chen family. Perhaps we could discuss this somewhere more private." Elena bristled at the formality, but something in the lawyer's tone made her pause. This wasn't just about Marcus wanting to clear his conscience. "My son will be here in an hour to help with the lunch rush," Elena said carefully. "Whatever you have to say, you'd better say it fast. And I want you gone before Christopher arrives." Marcus's face transformed at the mention of his son. "Christopher? You named him Christopher." "Don't!" Elena warned. "Don't you dare act like you care about him now." She flipped the sign on the door to closed and led them to a small table in the corner, as far from the windows as possible. Her hands shook as she poured coffee, muscle memory taking over when her mind couldn't process what was happening. "Elena," Marcus began, his hands wrapped around the mug as if drawing strength from its warmth. "That night I left. I didn't have a choice. My father had gotten involved with some dangerous people. He'd borrowed money from the wrong sources to keep his company afloat, and when he couldn't pay, he trailed off, looking at Vivian." The lawyer picked up the narrative with clinical precision. The Chen family was placed in witness protection. They had no choice but to disappear immediately. No contact with anyone from their former life, no explanations, no exceptions. Elena stared at them. "Witness protection? You expect me to believe—" "It's true," Marcus interrupted. "My father testified against Thomas Liu, who was running organized crime operations from California to the East Coast. We spent 15 years being moved from city to city, always looking over our shoulders. I wanted to contact you so many times, Elena. I wrote you letters I could never send. When Christopher would have been starting school, learning to ride a bike, playing Little League, I thought about you both every single day. Stop, Elena said, standing abruptly. Just stop. Even if this wild story is true, it doesn't change anything. You left. I was 17 and pregnant and alone. Do you have any idea what that was like? That's why we're here, Vivian interjected smoothly. The threat has been neutralized. Thomas, who died in prison 2 years ago, and his organization has been dismantled. Marcus is now free to reclaim his life, and he wants to make amends. Elena laughed bitterly. Make amends? You can't just make amends for 18 years with a conversation over coffee. I'm not asking you to forgive me, Marcus said quietly. I know I can't undo the past, but Elena, there's something else. Something you need to know about that night, about why everything happened the way it did. Vivian pulled out a thick folder from her briefcase. Before we proceed, Ms. Martinez, I need to inform you that what we're about to discuss involves a substantial legal matter. The Chen family wants to ensure you and Christopher are properly compensated for the hardships you've endured. Compensated. Elena felt her anger rising. You think you can buy your way back into our lives? No, Marcus said firmly. This isn't about buying anything. It's about the truth. Elena, you weren't just collateral damage in my family's situation. You were specifically targeted. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Elena sank back into her chair, her mind reeling. What are you talking about? Vivian opened the folder, revealing photographs and documents. Your father, Robert Martinez, wasn't just a construction worker. He was an undercover FBI agent investigating Thomas Liu's operations. Liu's people discovered his identity around the same time Marcus's father got involved with them. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. Her father had died in a construction accident when she was 15. Her mother had never recovered from the loss, spiraling into depression that made her harsh ultimatum about the pregnancy seem almost predictable in hindsight. They knew, Marcus continued, his voice heavy with long-carried guilt. Liu's people knew about your father, and they knew about us. When my dad agreed to testify, part of the deal was that they would protect you. But the only way to do that was to make it seem like I had abandoned you, like you meant nothing to me. If Liu thought you were important to me, you would have become a target, so you left to protect me. Elena's voice was barely a whisper. The FBI said it was the only way. They monitored you for years, made sure you were safe, but I couldn't. Know anything about your life, couldn't risk any contact that might expose you? Marcus's voice broke. I didn't know about Christopher until 3 months ago, when the all clear was finally given. Elena stood and walked to the window, watching the familiar street outside. Sea Haven had become her refuge, a place where she could build a life free from the pain of her past. Now that past was sitting at her table, rewriting every assumption she'd held for 18 years. Assuming I believe any of this, she said without turning around. What do you want from me now? Why are you really here? Because Christopher deserves to know the truth, Marcus said. And because there's an inheritance. My father passed away last year. He left instructions that once it was safe, half of everything should go to you and Christopher. It's substantial. Elena spun around. I don't want your money. It's not just about money. Vivian clarified. There are also matters of Christopher's heritage, medical history, and yes, financial security. The Chen family's technology patents alone are worth approximately $40 million. The number hit Elena like a physical blow. $40 million. She thought of all the nights she'd stayed awake, calculating whether she could afford Christopher's school supplies and groceries in the same week. The times she'd watered down soup to make it last an extra day. The college fund she'd managed to scrape together, $12,000 that seemed both precious and pathetically inadequate. "I need you to leave," she said suddenly. "Both of you, now." "Elena," Marcus started. "No, this is too much. I can't. I need to think." She moved toward the door, holding it open. "If any of this is real, if you actually care about Christopher's well-being, then you'll give me time to process this." Vivian placed a business card on the counter. "Of course. Please call when you're ready to discuss next steps. For what it's worth, Ms. Martinez, Marcus fought very hard to be able to contact you as soon as possible. The federal authorities wanted to wait another year." After they left, Elena locked the door and sank to the floor behind the counter, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking. She cried for the 17-year-old girl who thought she'd been abandoned, for the years of struggle that might have been unnecessary, for the father she'd lost without ever knowing his true job, and for the son who had grown up without the family he deserved. The sound of a key in the lock made her quickly wipe her eyes. Christopher walked in, all 6 feet 2 inches of him, his backpack slung over one shoulder. Her baby boy, now taller than her, with his father's eyes and her stubborn chin. "Mom, why's the shop closed? Are you okay?" His voice immediately shifted to concern. Elena stood, forcing a smile. "Just a minor spill. Everything's fine, honey. Ready for the lunch rush?" But Christopher knew her too well. He'd learned early to read the signs of her distress, had been her protector since he was old enough to understand they only had each other. "Mom, what's wrong? Did something happen?" She looked at her son. Honor roll student, basketball team, a captain, volunteer at the community center, and wondered how to tell him that everything he believed about his life was about to change. How did you explain that his father hadn't abandoned them, but had been protecting them? How did you tell him about grandfathers who were FBI agents and witness protection and $40 million? "We need to talk," she said finally. "But not here. Not now. After we close tonight, okay?" Christopher studied her face, then nodded. "Okay. But Mum, whatever it is, we'll handle it. We always do." As they worked side by side, serving the lunch crowd that had become their extended family over the years, Elena watched her son. He had Marcus's height and build, but he moved with her efficiency, smiled with her warmth. He was the perfect blend of both his parents, raised with the values she'd fought to instill alone. Rosa from the shelter came in for her usual sandwich, patting Elena's hand with knowing eyes. "You look troubled, Mija." "Just ghosts from the past," Elena murmured. That evening, after flipping the closed sign, Elena sat Christopher down and told him everything. She watched his face cycle through disbelief, anger, confusion, and something that might have been hope. "So he didn't abandon us?" Christopher asked for the third time, as if repetition might make it more real. "He was in witness protection this whole time?" "That's what he says. I don't know what to believe, Chris, but there are documents, photos, and this lawyer." Christopher was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then, "Do you have a picture of him?" Elena's heart clenched. In 18 years, Christopher had asked to see his father's picture exactly twice. Both times, she'd told him. She didn't have any, which was true. She'd burned them all in a fit of rage and grief when her pregnancy started showing. "No, honey, I'm sorry." What did he look like? Elena studied her son's face. "Like you," she admitted. "He looked exactly like you." The next morning, Elena called Vivian Zhao. They arranged to meet at a neutral location, a law office in the nearby city of Portland. Elena brought Rosa with her, the woman who had been more of a mother to her than her own had been willing to be. "Ay, mija," Rosa had said when Elena told her the story. "I always knew there was more to it. No boy who looked at you the way Marcus did in those photos would just leave." "What photos?" Elena asked, confused. "The ones in your box. The one you thought you lost in the move. I kept it safe for you all these years, waiting for when you were ready." Now, sitting in the sterile conference room, Elena clutched the small box Rosa had returned to her. Inside were the photos she thought she'd destroyed. Marcus teaching her to drive, Marcus at her senior award ceremony, Marcus with his hand on her still flat belly, both of them glowing with terrified joy. Vivian entered with two other people, an older Asian man in an expensive suit and a woman who looked like a federal agent. "Miss Martinez, this is Special Agent Sarah Harris, retired FBI. She was your father's partner. And this is James Chen, Marcus's uncle and current CEO of Chen Technologies." Agent Harris spoke first. "Elena, I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. Your father was one of the finest agents I ever worked with. He'd be so proud of what you've accomplished." "You knew my father?" "I did. Roberto was my training officer when I was a rookie. He specialized in deep cover operations. The construction worker identity was perfect. It let him move freely through Liu's money laundering operations." Harris pulled out a photo of Elena's father in his FBI dress uniform, something Elena had never seen. "He was 6 months from retirement when his cover was blown. His last request was that we protect you and your mother at all costs." Elena traced her father's face in the photo, seeing him clearly for the first time. "My mother? She knew?" "No. It was safer if she didn't." Roberto carried that burden alone. James Chen leaned forward. "Ms. Martinez, my brother, Marcus's father, made terrible mistakes getting involved with Liu, but he tried to make it right. His testimony put 17 criminals behind bars. The technology company he built was meant to be Marcus's inheritance, but he instructed that if Marcus had any children, the inheritance should be shared." "I don't understand," Elena said. "Why didn't anyone tell me any of this before? My father died 20 years ago. I had a right to know who he really was." Agent Harris shifted uncomfortably. There were ongoing operations that would have been compromised, and frankly, we lost track of you after you left your parents' house. By the time we located you again, you had built a new life here. The Bureau decided it was better to let sleeping dogs lie unless circumstances changed. Circumstances like Marcus wanting to reconnect? Elena's voice had an edge. Circumstances like Thomas Liu's death and the complete dismantling of his organization, Harris corrected. "Ms. Martinez, you have to understand. Liu had a long reach and a longer memory. Even from prison, he could have ordered retaliation. It's only in the last 2 years that we've been confident the threat is truly neutralized. Vivian produced more documents. There's something else." Your father had a life insurance policy through the FBI. It's been held in trust, accumulating interest. Combined with the settlement from the Chen family and the technology patents, Christopher stands to inherit close to $45 million. The number was staggering, but Elena found herself focused on something else. You keep talking about settlements and inheritances, but what about Marcus? Where is he in all of this? James Chen answered. My nephew is complicated. The years in witness protection were hard on him. He struggled with depression, survivor's guilt. He's been in therapy since we got the all clear, trying to work up the courage to contact you. Yesterday was actually his therapist's idea, to approach you in a familiar setting with support. He wants to meet Christopher, Vivian added, but he insisted that decision be entirely yours. He said he forfeited any parental rights the night he left, regardless of the circumstances. Elena stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Portland skyline. Somewhere in this city, Marcus was waiting to hear if he could meet his son. Her anger, carefully tended for 18 years, was harder to hold on to in the face of all these revelations. There's one more thing, Agent Harris said gently. Your father left something for you. We weren't able to give it to you before, but now... She pulled out a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. Elena's hands shook as she opened it. Her father's handwriting, still familiar after all these years. Mi querida Elena, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and the truth can finally be told. I'm so sorry for the secrets I had to keep. Every day I wanted to tell you and your mother who I really was. But my duty to protect you was stronger than my desire to be honest. I pray you can forgive me. Whatever path your life takes, know that you were the best thing I ever did. Not the arrests, not the commendations, but being your father. Love always, Papa. Tears streamed down Elena's face. Rosa held her as she sobbed. For the father she'd lost, for the years of not knowing, for the teenage girl who thought she'd been abandoned by everyone who mattered. Christopher took the news about the inheritance differently than Elena expected. Instead of excitement about the money, he was furious about the deception. So everyone lied, he said, pacing their small apartment above the bakery. My grandfather, my father, the FBI, everyone decided what was best for us without asking us. Chris, they were trying to protect us. From what? From having a family, from knowing the truth. His voice cracked, reminding Elena that under his mature exterior, he was still just 18. Do you know what it's like growing up as the kid whose dad didn't want him? The stories I made up in my head about why he left. Elena reached for him, but he pulled away. I need some air. After he left, Elena sat in the dark, wondering if she'd handled everything wrong. Should she have refused to hear Marcus out? Should she have told Christopher immediately? The weight of decisions, past and present, pressed down on her. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Elena? Marcus's voice was hesitant. I'm sorry to call, but Vivian said you met with everyone today. I wanted to make sure you're okay. Okay? Elena laughed bitterly. I just found out my entire life has been built on lies. My son just stormed out because he's processing the fact that his father didn't abandon him, but can't figure out if that makes it better or worse. So no, Marcus, I'm not okay. I'm sorry. I know that's inadequate, but stop apologizing. Elena interrupted. Just tell me something real. Not what the FBI told you to say or what your therapist suggested. Something real about those 18 years. There was a long pause, then, I tried to come back 3 times. The first was on Christopher's first birthday. I made it as far as the hospital where he was born before my handler found me. The second was when he would have started kindergarten. I thought if I could just see him once, just know he was okay. The third was the night before his high school graduation. I actually made it to Sea Haven that time, sat outside your bakery for hours watching you close up. You looked so strong, so capable. I realized you didn't need me anymore, if you ever had. You were there, at my bakery, June 13th last year. You wore a yellow sundress. Christopher came by after his shift at the community center. You both laughed about something. I could see you through the window but couldn't hear what. It was the first time I'd seen him in person since he was 3 months old. He's extraordinary, Elena. Elena closed her eyes, remembering that night. Christopher had been doing impressions of difficult customers, making her laugh until her sides hurt. Such a normal moment. But Marcus had been outside, watching the life they'd built without him. He is extraordinary, she agreed. No thanks to you. All thanks to you, Marcus corrected. I've kept tabs as much as I could, without violating the protection protocols. I know he's valedictorian, got a full scholarship to MIT. I know he volunteers at the same shelter where you lived. I know he still plays the guitar. Stop, Elena said. You don't get to know him from a distance and pretend that counts as being his father. You're right, I'm sorry. The next morning, Christopher returned with unexpected company, Elena's mother, Patricia. Elena hadn't seen her mother in 3 years, not since their last fight about Elena living in sin and raising Christopher without a father. Mama. Elena stared in shock. Patricia looked older, frailer, but her eyes were clear and determined. Christopher came to see me, told me, everything, Elena mija, we need to talk. They sat in Elena's small living room, 3 generations trying to bridge years of hurt and misunderstanding. I knew, Patricia said quietly. Not everything, but I knew Roberto was more than a construction worker. The late nights, the strange phone calls, the way he'd sometimes look over his shoulder. I knew, but I pretended not to. Mama, why didn't you ever tell me? Because after he died, I was terrified. If they killed him for what he knew, what would they do to you? When you got pregnant and that boy disappeared, I thought it was connected somehow. I was so scared, Mija. I thought if I pushed you away, you'd be safer. So you kicked me out to protect me? Elena's voice was thick with tears. I handled it all wrong. The fear made me cruel when I should have been strong. I've regretted it every day since. Patricia reached for Elena's hand. I'm so sorry, my daughter, for everything. Christopher watched this reconciliation with wise eyes. So everyone was trying to protect everyone else, and we all ended up alone and miserable. Maybe it's time we try something different. What do you mean? Elena asked. I want to meet him, my father, not because I forgive him or because I want his money, but because I need to see him for myself. I need to understand who he is, so I can understand who I am. Elena's instinct was to protect him, but she recognized the irony. Hadn't too much protection caused all this pain? If that's what you want, she said slowly. But Christopher, you need to be prepared. The man he is now might not be who you hope he'll be. I don't have hopes, Christopher said firmly. I have questions. They arranged to meet at a restaurant in Portland, neutral ground. Elena insisted on being present, and Marcus agreed to all her conditions. But when they arrived at the appointed time, Marcus wasn't alone. An elegant woman in her 60s sat beside him, and next to her, a young woman about Christopher's age. Elena. Marcus stood quickly. This is my mother, Grace Chen, and my sister, Lily. They insisted on coming. Grace Chen rose with dignity, but Elena could see tears in her eyes. We have waited 18 years to meet our grandson, she said simply. Please forgive the intrusion, but we couldn't wait another day. Christopher stood frozen, taking in this instant family. Lily stepped forward first. You look just like the baby pictures of Marcus, she said to Christopher. It's uncanny. Lily was born 2 years after we went into protection, Marcus explained. She grew up hearing stories about the family we left behind, Lily finished. About my nephew who I'd never meet. You're kind of a legend in our family, Christopher. The dinner was surreal. Christopher sat between Elena and Marcus, asking careful questions while the Chen family tried not to stare at him with naked longing. Grace Chen kept reaching toward him, then catching herself, while Lily chatted nervously about their shared interests in technology and music. Then Marcus's phone buzzed. His face went pale. As he read the message, "We need to leave, now." "What's wrong?" Elena demanded. "Someone leaked our location. There are reporters coming." He was cut off by a commotion at the restaurant entrance. Photographers burst in, cameras flashing, voices shouting questions. "Mr. Chen, is it true you abandoned your pregnant girlfriend?" "Christopher, how does it feel to meet your billionaire father?" "Elena, will you be suing for back child support?" In the chaos, Elena saw Christopher's face shut down, the walls he'd started to lower slamming back into place. This was his nightmare, becoming a spectacle, his private pain turned into public entertainment. This way. Lily grabbed Christopher's hand, leading them through the kitchen. The Chen family's security team materialized, creating a pathway to a waiting car, but the damage was done. Christopher refused to get in the car with them. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," he told Marcus coldly. "You bring chaos. You bring lies and photographers and drama. Mom and I were fine before you showed up." "Christopher, please." Marcus reached for him, but Christopher stepped back. "No, I wanted to meet you to get answers, not to become some tabloid story about the billionaire's secret son. Stay away from us." Back at their apartment, Elena found Christopher destroying his college acceptance letters. "What are you doing?" "I'm not going to MIT. Not with his money, not with this hanging over my head. Everyone will think I got in because of who my father is, not what I've accomplished." "Christopher, no. You earned that scholarship before any of this happened. It doesn't matter. Everything's tainted now." He looked at her with Marcus's eyes, but filled with her own stubborn pride. "I won't be bought. Not with money, not with some fairy tale about witness protection and noble sacrifices." Elena watched her son struggle with the same pride that had kept her going through the hardest times. She understood his anger, but also saw what he couldn't, that he was about to throw away his dreams out of spite. The next morning, Vivian Zhao arrived with troubling news. The media leak came from inside Radcliffe Industries. It seems not everyone is happy about the Chen family's return to public life. There are board members who would prefer the scandal to overshadow the company's upcoming merger, so they're using my son as a pawn. Elena's protective instincts flared. "I'm afraid so. They're hoping the negative publicity will force the Chen family to step back from the business." Elena made a decision. "Set up a press conference. If they want a story, I'll give them one. But we control the narrative, not them." The press conference was held at the Harbour Inn, Sea Haven's largest venue. Elena had never spoken to more than a dozen people at once, But as she looked out at the sea of reporters and cameras, she found strength in her anger. 18 years ago, I was a 17-year-old girl who thought she'd been abandoned by the boy she loved, she began, her voice steady. I spent those years believing I wasn't enough, that my child wasn't wanted. I built a life on that lie, because it was the only truth I had. She told them everything. The FBI connection, the witness protection, the threats that had shaped all their lives. But more than that, she told them about the cost of secrets, the price of protection that left people broken and alone. My son grew up without a father, not because he wasn't wanted, but because powerful people decided that keeping us in the dark was safer than trusting us with the truth. My father died without me ever knowing he was a hero. My mother and I spent years estranged because fear made her cruel and pride made me unforgiving. Christopher watched from the side, his expression unreadable. But the real truth, Elena continued, is that love isn't about grand gestures or noble sacrifices. It's about showing up. It's about being there for the homework and the heartbreaks, the basketball games and the bad dreams. Marcus Chen might have loved us enough to leave, but he wasn't there to love us through the everyday moments that make a life. She looked directly at one of the cameras. So to those trying to use my family for your corporate games, know this: we are not pawns. We are not a scandal or a headline. We are survivors who built something beautiful from heartbreak, and we will not be intimidated or bought or silenced. The room erupted with questions, but Elena was done. She walked off the podium to where Christopher stood. He pulled her into a fierce hug. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he whispered, "for all of it." That evening, Marcus came to the bakery alone. No lawyers, no family, no security, just him, standing in the rain outside her door. "I saw the press conference," he said when she let him in. "You were magnificent. You always were stronger than any of us." "What do you want, Marcus?" To say goodbye properly this time, Christopher made his feelings clear. "I'll respect his wishes. The money will be placed in trust. He can access it or ignore it as he chooses. But Elena, I need you to know something." He pulled out a worn envelope. Inside were dozens of photos, Christopher's school pictures, newspaper clippings of his achievements, programs from his basketball games. "How did you get these?" "Rosa. She sent them to a P.O. box for years, never knowing. If I'd received them, it was the only connection I had. I know it doesn't make up for not being there, but I need you to know he was loved every single day, even from a distance." Elena studied the man she'd once loved, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. Not a villain or a hero, just a person who'd been caught in circumstances beyond his control and made choices that haunted him. "Tell me about Lily," she said unexpectedly. "Your sister." Marcus blinked at the change of subject. "She's brilliant, studying bioengineering, wants to use technology to solve medical problems in developing countries." He smiled sadly. "She's who Christopher might have been if we'd raised him together, privileged but purposeful." 6 months later, Eleanor stood in the renovated bakery, watching the morning rush with satisfaction. The press conference had brought unexpected benefits. Customers from all over Maine came to support the brave single mother, and she'd been able to hire help and expand the business. Christopher had ultimately decided to attend MIT, but on his own terms. He'd deferred the Chen scholarship and instead started a non-profit that helped young single mothers access education and job training. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. He was using his inheritance to prevent other families from experiencing what they had. "Mom, you've got visitors," her assistant called out. Elena looked up to see Patricia, her mother, entering with Rosa. They came by every Wednesday now, their informal family expanding to include the women who'd been there when blood family couldn't. "Bidabmeha, you need to see this," Rosa said, holding up her phone. The headline read, "Chen Technologies announces revolutionary medical software. Christopher Martinez named Youth Advisory Board member." Elena smiled. Her son had found a way to connect with his father's family on his own terms, professionally rather than personally. It was a start. The bell chimed again, and Lily Chen entered, alone as always for her weekly visit. She and Christopher had developed an unexpected friendship, the aunt and nephew who were practically the same age, bonding over shared interests and the strange circumstances that had kept them apart. "Is Christopher here?" Lily asked. "We're supposed to go over the beta testing for the medical app." "He's in the back working on inventory," Elena said. "Lily, how's your father?" The young woman's face softened. "Better. The therapy is helping. He's teaching part-time at the university now. Seems more at peace." She paused. "He asks about you both, but he's respecting the boundaries." Eleanor nodded. Maybe someday there would be room for forgiveness, for some kind of relationship. Or maybe not, but she'd learned that family was more than blood or law or time. It was the people who showed up, who stayed when staying was hard, who loved you through your worst moments and celebrated your best. "Aunt Lily!" Christopher emerged from the back, flour in his hair from helping with the morning baking. The title had been his choice, acknowledging the relationship while maintaining the distance he needed. As Elena watched them work together, she reflected on how far they'd all come. The abandoned pregnant teenager had become a successful business owner. The boy who'd grown up without a father had become a man who understood that identity wasn't about who contributed your DNA, but who you chose to become. That evening, as Elena closed the shop, she found an envelope tucked under the door. No name, no address, just her name in familiar handwriting. Inside was a single photo, Marcus at 17, holding newborn Christopher in the hospital, tears streaming down his young face. On the back, in fresh ink, "The happiest and saddest day of my life. Thank you for raising him to be the man I couldn't be." Elena tucked the photo into her apron pocket and looked up at the apartment where Christopher was probably studying, preparing to change the world in his own way. They'd built a good life from the ashes of abandonment and lies. Not the life she'd imagined at 17, but perhaps the life they were meant to have. The truth hadn't set them free in the way she'd expected. Instead, it had shown them they'd been free all along, free to define family on their own terms, free to choose forgiveness or distance, free to build something beautiful from broken pieces. As she climbed the stairs to their apartment, Elena heard Christopher playing his guitar, the same melody she'd hummed to him as a baby when the loneliness threatened to overwhelm her. Now it sounded like hope, like possibility, like a future written by their own hands. The abandoned pregnant teen had returned, not for revenge or even reconciliation, but for truth. And in finding it, she discovered that the life she'd built, while waiting for answers, was actually the answer itself. Love wasn't about grand gestures or perfect families. It was about showing up day after day and choosing to build something beautiful from whatever pieces you were given. The story that had begun with abandonment had become one of resilience, of chosen family, of love that transcended conventional definitions. And while the future remained unwritten, one thing was certain: they would write it together on their own terms with their own hands.